Depressed dog who lost his BFF finally let someone strange in after his owners gave up on trying to help him. Humans are not the only ones who get affected by a loss. There are so many other animals that mourn the loss of a loved one or a friend. We all know that dogs are one of the friendliest and compassionate animals around us. No wonder they are often referred to as man's best friend. So from this very statement, it is clear that they would indeed get thoroughly affected if they were to lose anyone close to their heart. This is the story of a depressed dog that was heavily mourning the loss of a loved one, that life decided to give him something unexpected and totally out of the blue. In case you never knew, there are a few specific animals that can get depressed if they are emotionally or mentally harmed. Among them, dogs may be the ones we most see falling into this kind of mental state, as they are the most popular pets. When this lovely dog named George had to go on without his best friend in 2014, he succumbed to a very deep depression. Since he was a very affectionate and attached dog, he would spend every waking moment with his pal. The two were inseparable and would never want to be torn apart, even for a few minutes. Since this was the case, his owners grew incredibly worried that George would not be able to recover. The two spent each day together, so how would the poor pup cope with this huge loss? So after losing his dearest friend, George had no choice but to live and go on with his life. He felt empty, and his owners were worried he would never be the same again. They were so scared that his depression would get the best of him and that he would never return to his old cheerful self. But after 2 years passed, something that took everyone by surprise occurred. George had now gone 2 years without the company of his friend. It was difficult for his owners to see him so lonely and inactive. He was always playful and loud, cheering the family with his old pal before. It had been a long, lonely time for the pooch, but his life was soon about to turn a new leaf. George would soon encounter someone whom no one thought could ever make a difference. This is George. He had been living with his family for a long time now, with his dear pal. George and his best mate, who is a Labrador named Blackie, had been going strong ever since they first met 10 years ago. So, just imagine how long they had been companions for. That's over a decade of friendship they shared. And indeed, the two had such a strong connection. Blackie and George were so happy to be living together with their loving family. They were cared for and well fed by the family that owns them. These two dogs did not have much to complain, as they had each other, if ever either of them felt a sense of loneliness. The two dogs did not like to be kept apart and would spend each day doing one or the other activity together. George and his best friend Blackie enjoyed things that any other dog would. The two were healthy and playful when they were together or with their family. They thoroughly enjoyed playing outside, taking long, comforting naps, and to just be together no matter what. They were basically joined at the hip because no one could do anything to tear them apart. The two dogs met over 10 years ago. This would mean that they met when they were just puppies. They had gone through so much together and were always glad to have each other's back. They had been with each other during the good times and bad times. The bond that they shared strengthened as they aged with time. But as life goes, all good things must eventually come to an end. As the dogs were enjoying their time together, little did they know that their days were slowly getting numbered. We must keep in mind that 10 years is a long time for a dog, especially, and so the age comes with complications in health. And unfortunately, Blackie unexpectedly expired in the year 2014, making George feel very alone and in a mental mess. So when his friend suddenly passed away, George was left to spend his days without his partner in crime. He did not function properly for a long while because he had lived his whole life with Blackie by his side. And about 2 years later of spending his days without his friend, George's owner was beginning to get afraid for his life. But little did everyone know that something was about to take over their lives. George went from being a dog that would cheer everyone up and brighten up the lives of others around him. He was a friendly dog who loved to do the silliest things with his partner Blackie. But now that Blackie was gone, life as he knew it was not the same. His owner was interviewed later, and she revealed that George almost died twice and that he would regularly keep starving himself. Poor George was so confused by the fact that his buddy was suddenly taken away from him and his behavior was much affected. He was no longer the fun-loving dog that would spark up the whole room. The loss of his best friend had just taken a toll on him and his will to live on. His owner tried so many things, but nothing was strong enough to pull him out of his despair. So what could they do? It would definitely be a challenge for anyone to have to go on with life after such a significant part of your life gets taken away for good. Imagine the kind of heartbreak you would be left with if you lose your best friend one day randomly. So you cannot judge the poor dog when he was unable to go on with his life anymore. It was just not the same without Blackie in his life. His owners were freaking out because they had just lost one dog and now their other dog was under depression. To see one dog leave was hard enough, but now George was losing his sense. He did not want to participate or play with anyone. His owners saw the change in behavior quite quickly and did all they could to make their pup feel better, but all their attempts failed. The poor pup was not only sad and down, but he was also picking up really bad habits too. His loss had left such a huge impact on George that nothing seemed to help him come out of the depression he had sunken into. When the owner was interviewed by the media folks, she revealed that George had developed such a bad anxiety that he would gnaw on his own limbs. Since Blackie's departure had taken such a toll on George's well-being, it was starting to be evident that the family would have to do something about it quick. But each time they tried to help him or make him feel better, it seemed as though everything was meaningless for the sad dog. They were hoping for a miracle, and were still waiting for something or someone to change him back. The family was running out of ideas to cheer up their dog. He had been stuck in this depression hole for over 2 years now, and they felt like it was a losing battle. But we never know what life has in store for us. There is always a surprise or another waiting for us around the corner. So one day in August of 2016, George was lying on the porch when someone odd came up to him. So who had approached the dog who was still affected by his friend's death? Well, it was a white duck. This was quite the shock for George's owners, as it was such a random act. It was also surprising enough for the duck to be fearless of the dog and to actually get close to him. So how was George, who had rejected any kind of offer to make him feel better, going to treat the clueless white duck? As George was still down in the dumps, sad about his lonely life, the sweet little duck waddled right up to George. George was just resting on the porch when the duck just sat next to him, cuddling up close immediately. George could no longer ignore this new companion who had just sort of ambushed him. His reaction was something that his owners could not even believe. For a dog that had been in a downward spiral for such a long while, his owners did not expect George to react the way he did at all. As a matter of fact, George immediately cheered up. Imagine the kind of happiness and relief his owners might have felt upon seeing him perk up. It was something that had not happened for a long while, so where had this random duck come from? So when everything else failed and the duck managed to cheer him up, George's owners were so glad. They were slowly giving up on him, since he did not respond positively to anything they tried to help him with. Seeing him with the duck, his owner posted a Facebook update that read, "We have no idea where this duck came from, but the duck sure loves George." For a random duck to just swoop right in and immediately tear down the walls that poor depressed George had built is something truly incredible. The two had instantly made a connection with each other, and now George has a friend again. Since the duck came out of nowhere, it was a little weird, but to see them get close was something really sweet and adorable. Since that strange but sweet encounter, George was no longer alone. The little white duck had found a way to win over the heart of the depressed dog, like nothing could in the recent past. From the first time they met, the sweet little duck and the dog became close friends. The poor depressed George no longer felt like his life was lonely, because he now had someone to share his every day with. If anyone were to tell you that a duck and a dog instantly connected on their first meeting would be something anyone would find hard to believe. After all, we have only seen this kind of friendship in cartoons, right? So even though this was indeed an odd pairing, their companionship was not bounded. The two were fit like two peas in a pod, a very weirdly shaped pod. Even though they felt like it was so weird, George's owners were overjoyed to see his progress. They were happy to see that their once depressed dog now had a friend to share his time with. He was slowly forgetting about his anxiety and the odd behavior he used to project. It was truly a delight for them to see that their dog was now starting to enjoy life once more. The two were once again doing things that George and Blackie would do back in the day. With his new duck friend, George loves to take strolls in the yard, and do not even get us started on how they take naps. The two have no issues about sharing space when it comes to slumber time. It is undoubtedly an amusing sight to see when a duck and a dog blend so well together. A lot has happened since Blackie passed away. George had not been dealing well with the loss of his BFF, but now things were slowly turning for the better. George's owner said this about the strange way their beloved dog came out of his depression. "It is strange for a duck to just appear at our house and be attached to our dog, and even more strangely for it to be during the anniversary week of Blackie's passing." As we all know, everything can't be all smooth and crisp. That is certainly not how life works. Even though the family was glad to see George bounce back, the new addition to his life was something that needed extra maintenance too. There was a downside to his new relationship. The friend that was giving George a reason to be more positive would occasionally have duck droppings all over the house. Even though the white duck had random droppings in and around the house, the owners were not so upset about this. The mere fact that this duck was making their dog happy and feeling alive again was something they would not trade for anything. No amount of poop was going to make them feel like their dog's happiness should be put up for questioning. George was no longer the sad and drained pooch he was a few days back, all because of his new feathered pal. George was finally on the road towards recovery. He had been so dull the past 2 years that it was exciting to see for his dear owners who had sort of given up on him. He was not just in better spirits, but the spark in his life that died long ago was slowly igniting once again. The poor dog had been looking for something or someone to give him peace of mind for a long while. And now here it was, right in front of him, delivered to him in the most unexpected manner. George was slowly healing, and the more time he spends with his companion, the more his anxiety reduced. He was getting a sense of peace from the duck. The pair does not even seem to care or be aware of their obvious difference. They were not focusing on their difference, but were rather rejoicing in them. George clearly did not care about the fact that his bestie was a duck who was covered in feathers as opposed to his previous one who was covered in fur. He was grateful to have somebody next to him, and it was enough. If your dog had been depressed for as long as George was, you would be rejoicing to see him perk up, right? Since the duck has shown up, George has been fine, the two owners later revealed to interviewers. He's not whined. He's not meeting you at your car, looking sad. It felt wonderful for his owners to see that their furry pet was letting them in again after 2 long years of being unresponsive. Since the white duck was the only thing that was capable of bringing George to be his old self, the owner had to accept the duck too. The only drawback was that George's new best friend had to be given new accommodations by his owners. The duck would require a new wading pool to occasionally take a dip. Also, poo cleanup was something that the owners had to be on standby each day now. As the duck and the dog did not want to be separated anymore, the owners had no choice but to take the duck in. And now that the random white duck was part of the family, his owners wanted to give him a name too. The family members were hardcore Republicans, so they gave the duck a new name, Donald, after the commander-in-chief. Since it is uncommon to see a duck and a dog spark up a friendship, when their story reached social media, it immediately gained attention. George and Donald's story was something that everyone who heard about it wanted to dig into and learn more about. How is it possible for a dog to let a duck in so easily? Could his loss and loneliness from losing Blackie contribute to this at all? The two had found quite the fan following on social media. There was one person who commented about George and his new pal. He claimed that the duck might be his old friend Blackie. I would remind all those who believe in reincarnation might consider the duck to be George's old pal coming back to comfort him. People were so entertained and intrigued by the odd pair that a lot of theories and assumptions popped up. There was yet another commenter who suggested that Blackie's spirit had taken over the duck's body. Is there such a thing as duck possession? If so, there is a high chance that Donald really is Blackie. Although the reason behind these two becoming so close may never be uncovered, there is no denying that they do make a really cute pair. They soon gained many followers and fans all over social media. The positive comments that the duck and dog got touched George's owners' hearts, and were glad their pets managed to motivate and inspire others. These days, George and Donald's friendship is still as strong as ever. They are living proof that sometimes opposites do attract. They have proven that love and friendship are not bounded by differences or the type of species one belongs to. We sincerely hope that they continue to make each other happy and bring joy to whomever they meet along the way.